Dear students, I am Amin. I am teaching in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. In today's lecture, I am going to explain the Secretariat of United Nations, its powers, functions, and role. I am also going to discuss the various challenges which UN Secretariat faces while discharging its functions, its duties. Dear students, UN Secretariat is one of the main organs of the United Nations. It is an administrative arm of the United Nations. It is UN Secretariat which is responsible for implementing the decisions and policies of the UN's principal organs, such as General Assembly, Collective Security. This UN Secretariat is headed by the UN Secretary General, who is aided by several Deputy Secretary Generals, experts, administrators, and clerks. Dear students, first let's have a look at the various functions performed by the UN Secretariat. The UN Secretariat performs many functions and responsibilities like it provides administrative support to the UN. This administrative support includes like organizing meetings. So it is UN Secretariat which is responsible for scheduling, for organizing meetings of the UN's principal organs as well as UN's specialized agencies. This UN Secretariat also prepares background papers, reports, and resolutions for meetings and ensuring that accurate and relevant information is available to member states and decision makers. Under this administrative support, the Secretariat also manages the budget of the United Nations, including allocating funds to different programs and activities, and ensuring financial accountability and transparency. The UN Secretariat also facilitates communication among member states, UN agencies, and other stakeholders, ensuring effective exchange of information and coordination of efforts. Another important function of the UN's Secretariat is to implement decisions, which means that the Secretariat is responsible for implementing the decisions and resolutions adopted by the UN's principal organs like General Assembly and Security Council. UN Secretariat also holds programs to translate policy objectives into actionable programs and initiatives, coordinating the work of different UN entities to achieve common goals. The UN Secretariat also monitors the implementation of UN policies and programs, evaluating their impact and effectiveness and recommending adjustments as needed. Another important function of the UN Secretariat is that it coordinates UN entities. It means it also plays a central role in coordinating the activities of the UN system, ensuring coherence and cooperation among different agencies, programs, and specialized bodies. So, the Secretariat promotes collaboration and cooperation among UN entities, particularly in areas such as development, humanitarian assistance, and peacekeeping. The UN Secretariat also harmonizes approaches and strategies to address global challenges, promoting a unified response to issues such as poverty reduction, environmental protection, and public health crises. The UN Secretariat also plays an important function in terms of peacekeeping and conflict resolution. The UN Secretariat also oversees and supports UN peacekeeping missions around the world, providing logistical, administrative, and political support to peacekeepers deployed in conflict affected areas. It also facilitates dialogue, mediation, and negotiation processes aimed at resolving conflicts and promoting reconciliation among conflicting parties. The Secretariat also supports post conflict reconstruction efforts as well, working with governments, civil society, and international partners to build institutions, restore stability, and promote reconciliation. The Secretariat also promotes human rights through specialized offices such as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The Secretariat promotes and protects human rights globally, advocating for adherence to international human rights standards and principles. The UN Secretariat also represents the UN. The Secretary General, as the head of the UN Secretariat, represents the United Nations in international forums, conferences, and diplomatic negotiations, articulating the UN's positions and priorities on global issues. The Secretariat also engages with member states, non governmental organizations, and other stakeholders to build consensus, mobilize support for UN initiatives, and promote cooperation in addressing global challenges. We can say that UN Secretariat plays a multiple roles in supporting the work of the United Nations, advancing its objectives and principles, and addressing complex global challenges through administrative support, policy implementation, coordination, peacekeeping, human rights advocacy, development assistance, and international representation. Dear student, now we are going to discuss the key departments, key offices within the UN Secretariat. There are some offices within the UN Secretariat which help it to perform its functions. Some of the important departments and offices are like Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs. This department is responsible for preventive diplomacy, mediation, and political analysis. It also facilitates peace processes, supports peace building efforts, and provides electoral assistance. It also works closely with UN peacekeeping operations and special political missions. Then there is another department which is known as Department of Peace Operations. This department operates this department oversees and manages UN peacekeeping operations deployed around the world. It also provides logistical, administrative, and operational support to peacekeepers. It also works to ensure the safety and security of peacekeeping personnel and local populations. Another department is Department of Management, Strategy, Policy and Compliance. This department develops policies and strategies related to human resources, budget, procurement, and other administrative matters. It also ensures compliance with UN regulations, rules, and procedures. It also manages internal oversight and evaluation mechanisms. Another department of UN's Secretariat is Department of Economic and Social Affairs. This department promotes sustainable development, economic growth, and social progress. It conducts research and analysis on global economic, social, and environmental issues. It also supports intergovernmental processes, including the annual session of the Economic and Social Council. Then there is another department, Department of Global Communication. It leads public information and communication efforts to raise awareness about UN activities and priorities, manage the UN website, social media platforms, and multimedia content production. It also organizes events, campaigns, and outreach activities to engage with the public and media. Besides these key departments, there are also other offices, other departments like Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Efforts. This Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs coordinates humanitarian response efforts in crises and emergencies, mobilizes funding, resources, and partnerships to support humanitarian operations. It also advocates for the protection of civilians and respect for humanitarian principles. There is another important office which is known as Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This office promotes and protects human rights worldwide, advocating for adherence to international human rights standards and principles. It also provides technical assistance, capacity building, and monitoring support to governments and civil society organizations. It also investigates human rights violations and supports efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. Then there is another office, Office of Legal Affairs. This office provides legal advice and assistance to the UN organs, specialized agencies, and member states. It drafts legal instruments, treaties, and resolutions. It represents the UN in legal proceedings and arbitrations. Then there is another office, Office of Internal Oversight Services. This office conducts internal audits, investigations, and evaluations to ensure accountability, transparency, and compliance with UN regulations. It identifies areas for improvement and recommends corrective actions to address deficiencies. It enhances the effectiveness and efficiency of UN operations through risk management and performance monitoring. Then there is another important office, Office of the Secretary General. This office provides support to the UN Secretary General in fulfilling his responsibilities in performing his functions. It manages the Secretary General's agenda, correspondence, and official engagements. It coordinates with other UN departments, agencies, and member states on behalf of the Secretary General. So these are just a few key departments and offices within the UN Secretariat. Each department plays a critical role in supporting the work of the United Nations and advancing its objectives across various areas of international peace and security, human rights, sustainable development, and humanitarian assistance. Dear students, now we are going to see the challenges which UN Secretariat faces while discharging its functions while performing its duties. The UN Secretariat faces many challenges while carrying out its responsibilities effectively. Some of the challenges are like funding and resource constraints. Dear students, as you know, the UN depends heavily on voluntary contributions from member states to fund its operations and programs. However, funding shortage can hinder the Secretariat's ability to implement key initiatives and provide essential services. For example, funding shortfalls have often affected humanitarian response efforts in conflict affected regions, leading to delays in delivering life saving aid to affected populations. Another challenge for the UN Secretariat is that it operates in a complex political environment where member states may have different interests and priorities. Political tensions and disagreements among member states can impede consensus building and decision making within the organization. For instance, disagreements among UN Security Council members have prevented the adoption of resolutions on pressing international crises such as the conflict in Syria. The UN Secretariat is, as you know, tasked with addressing a wide range of global challenges, including peace, security, human rights, sustainable development, and humanitarian assistance. The increasing complexity and interconnectedness of these challenges have led to a growing demand for UN services and expertise. However, the Secretariat's capacity and resources may not always be sufficient to meet these demands effectively, therefore leading to gaps in implementation and service delivery. Another challenge which UN's Secretariat faces is bureaucratic and institutional constraints. The UN's bureaucratic structure and complex decision making process can sometimes slow down the implementation of initiatives and reforms. Red tapeism overlapping in mandates within the sectorate may hinder coordination and cooperation among different departments and offices. For instance, efforts to streamline administrative procedures and improve efficiency within the Secretariat have often been hampered by bureaucratic inertia and resistance to change. The UN Secretariat also faces significant operational challenges in conflict affected regions where security risks, logistical constraints, and political instability can impede the delivery of humanitarian aid and the implementation of peacekeeping missions. For instance, peacekeepers deployed to volatile environments may face threats from armed groups, making it difficult to fulfill their mandate of protecting civilians and maintaining peace. Another challenge which UN Secretariat faces is that ensuring accountability and transparency in the management of UN resources and operations is a constant challenge for the Secretariat. Cases of fraud, corruption, mismanagement can undermine the credibility of the organization and can erode public trust. For instance, allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeepers have raised serious concerns about accountability and oversight within the UN peacekeeping missions. The increasing dependence on technology and digital platforms within the UN Secretariat has exposed the organization to cybersecurity risks, including hacking, data breaches, and information leaks. Malicious cyber attacks targeting UN systems and networks can disrupt operations, compromise sensitive information, and undermine the organization's ability to fulfill its mandate effectively. So, these are some challenges which UN Secretariat faces. Addressing these challenges requires concerted efforts from member states, UN leadership, and other stakeholders to provide adequate funding and resources, strengthen governance and accountability mechanisms, streamline administrative processes, enhance coordination and cooperation, and invest in technology and cybersecurity infrastructure. By addressing these challenges, the UN Secretariat can better fulfill its responsibilities and advance the organization's objectives of promoting peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development globally. Dear students, though UN Secretariat is facing many challenges, but still the UN Secretariat has played a crucial role in numerous instances throughout its history. Now I am giving you a few examples which highlight the role of the UN Secretariat. For example, peacekeeping operations in East Timor. Following the violence and unrest in East Timor in 1999, the UN Security Council deployed a peacekeeping mission, which is known as United Nations Transnational Administration in East Timor. The UN Secretariat played a central role in coordinating the deployment of peacekeepers, providing logistical support, and facilitating dialogue among conflicting parties. Through its efforts, the Secretariat helped to restore stability, promote reconciliation, and facilitate the transition to independence for East Timor. Another example is the response to the Ebola virus in Africa. The UN Secretariat played a crucial role in coordinating the international response to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which began in 2014 and affected many countries in Africa. The Secretariat mobilized resources, coordinated the efforts of UN agencies and international partners, and provided technical assistance to affected countries in their response efforts. Through its leadership, the Secretariat helped to contain the spread of the virus, strengthen health systems, and mitigate the socio-economic impact of the outbreak. Another example is Paris Agreement on Climate Change. The UN Secretariat played an important role in facilitating the negotiation and adoption of the Paris Agreement, which is a landmark international treaty aimed at addressing climate change. The UN Secretariat provided technical support, organized conferences and meetings, and facilitated dialogue among member states to reach consensus on key issues. Through its efforts, the Secretariat helped to mobilize political will, build momentum, and secure commitments from countries to take ambitious action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change. Another example is verification of chemical weapons in Syria. In response to the use of chemical weapons in Syria, the UN Security Council established an organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons, which is known as United Nations Joint Investigative Mechanism in 2013. The Secretariat played a crucial role in supporting the work of the Joint Investigative Mechanism, providing logistical and technical assistance and facilitating cooperation between the UN and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Through its efforts, the Secretariat helped to verify and document instances of chemical weapons use in Syria, thus contributing to efforts to hold perpetrators accountable and prevent future attacks. The UN Secretariat has also actively got involved in the response to the Rohingya refugee crisis, which happened in recently, where hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims have fled violence and persecution. The UN Secretariat has mobilized humanitarian assistance, coordinated the efforts of UN agencies and international partners, and advocated for the protection of refugees and the resolution of the problem. Through its efforts, the Secretariat helped to provide life-saving aid, support the needs of refugees, and push for long-term solutions to address the root causes of the crisis. So these are few examples which highlight the diverse role and responsibilities of the UN Secretariat in addressing complex global challenges, from conflict resolution and peacekeeping to humanitarian assistance and climate change mitigation. Through its leadership, coordination, and expertise, the Secretariat plays a crucial role in advancing the objectives and principles of the United Nations and promoting peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development worldwide. So, dear students, in today's lesson, we have seen that United Nations Secretariat serves as the backbone of the UN, supporting its diverse functions and responsibilities across peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, development, and human rights. Despite facing challenges such as funding constraints, political tensions, and operational risks, the Secretariat plays an important role in addressing global crises and advancing the United Nations objectives. Through effective coordination, leadership, and collaboration, the Secretariat remains committed to promoting peace, security, and sustainable development worldwide. Thank you.